After 7 unwavering years of loyal service, Thomas Aldridge, Princess Charlotte's personal bodyguard, was unexpectedly dismissed from his post. There was no ceremony, no farewell, not even a formal statement, just a quiet handshake from the head of royal security and a folder coldly labeled transition. The dismissal came without explanation, only a vague mention of internal restructuring and new protocols. Thomas, a 41-year-old former SAS operative who had transitioned into royal protection, stood outside the gates of Buckingham Palace on his final day, a heavy silence hanging in the air. "She trusts me more than anyone in the world," he said softly, his voice tinged with both pride and heartbreak. "And I'd take a bullet for her. It's not fair." As he turned to walk away, there was no escort, no thanks, just the echo of his footsteps down the palace steps. In the pocket of his coat, he carried a small silver bracelet, engraved with the words 7 years. "Thank you, Tommy," a parting gift from Charlotte slipped into his hand during one of their final quiet moments. His face remained composed, but inside, he was reeling. For nearly a decade, he had been more than just a bodyguard. He had been Charlotte's anchor in a world of flashing cameras, rigid protocols, and constant public scrutiny. He had been her shadow during tours, her silent guardian at events, and her comfort during the quiet, unseen moments of royal life. To be removed so abruptly, with no goodbye, no explanation, left a deep wound, not just in his heart, but in the quiet bond they had built day by day. And as he walked away from the palace gates, unsure if he'd ever see her again, he couldn't help but wonder how she would take the news, or if she even knew he was gone. Inside the quiet halls of the palace, Princess Charlotte sat at the grand piano, her small fingers pressing carefully on the keys as her tutor guided her through a simple melody. To an outsider, it seemed like any ordinary afternoon, just another royal lesson in music. But unbeknownst to her, just beyond the palace gates, the man who had shadowed her every step for the past 7 years was walking away for the last time. Thomas Aldridge, the only bodyguard she'd ever truly known and trusted, had been dismissed without ceremony. It wasn't until later that evening, during a casual conversation with her older brother George, that the truth came out. "They replaced Thomas," he said offhandedly, not realizing the weight his words would carry. Charlotte blinked. For a long moment, she said nothing. Her mind, sharp and perceptive beyond her 9 years, immediately pieced things together. No farewell. No explanation. Just, gone. She didn't cry, not the loud, dramatic kind of crying adults often expect from children. Instead, a silence settled over her like a soft but heavy blanket. Her smile faded. The sparkle in her eyes dulled. She retreated inward, her usual warmth replaced with quiet introspection. At breakfast the next morning, Catherine, the Princess of Wales, immediately sensed the change. Charlotte, who normally filled the room with cheerful chatter about school and her books, sat quietly, slowly stirring her tea. "Are you feeling all right, darling?" Catherine asked gently. "I'm just tired," Charlotte replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But Catherine knew her daughter too well. This wasn't tiredness, it was heartache disguised behind politeness. It was the kind of emotional weight too big for a child to name. Over the following days, Charlotte grew more withdrawn. She still went through the motions, attending lessons, smiling politely at events, but something was missing. The presence of Thomas, her silent protector, her secret confidant, had left an invisible hole in her world. And though the adults around her assumed she would adjust with time, they didn't see the quiet way she glanced over her shoulder, expecting to find him there. She wasn't just sad. She was mourning. And she didn't know how to say it out loud. Back in the quiet countryside of Kent, far removed from the ornate halls of Kensington Palace, Thomas Aldridge was learning how to start over. Each morning began with a sense of purpose. He had opened a modest security training center for young veterans, hoping to give others the tools and discipline that had once shaped him. But beneath the surface, there was a constant tug at his heart, a quiet emptiness that structure alone couldn't fill. He was no longer a royal protector. He was no longer her protector. The bracelet sat on his desk, always in sight. Silver and simple, engraved with the words, 7 years. "Thank you, Tommy." It wasn't just a farewell gift. It was a memory carved into metal, a symbol of everything he had built with Princess Charlotte over the course of her young life. Every time his eyes landed on it, a wave of emotions would rise: pride, sadness, and a longing that surprised even him. He had thought he was prepared for the transition. He had expected the distance. But he hadn't expected how much he would miss her. He often caught himself looking at the door as if expecting her to walk in with another crayon drawing or an excited story about her day. Instead, there was only silence, broken by the occasional sounds of his trainees practicing outside. The noise helped dull the ache, but it didn't erase it. Thomas thought about reaching out, maybe through an old contact at the palace or a discreet message to the nanny, Margaret. But every time he picked up his phone, his training and sense of duty pulled him back. He was no longer part of that world, and any contact might be seen as crossing a line. So he stayed silent, convincing himself it was for the best. He told himself that Charlotte was young, that she'd move on quickly, that perhaps someone else had already stepped into his shoes. But deep down, there was a voice he couldn't silence, the one that whispered she hadn't forgotten him. That their bond, forged over years of quiet conversations, shared routines, and unspoken understanding, couldn't be erased so easily. And miles away, behind palace walls, that voice was right. Charlotte hadn't forgotten. In fact, she was holding on more tightly than ever. Inside the ornate walls of Kensington Palace, everything appeared to move on as usual. Royal routines continued. Schedules were kept. Smiles were worn. But behind closed doors, something within Princess Charlotte had quietly begun to unravel. No one noticed it immediately. After all, she didn't throw tantrums or cry in the hallways. She attended her lessons, curtsied when expected, and maintained the proper decorum of a young royal. But those closest to her began to sense the difference. The spark in her eyes had dulled. Her laughter, once bright and unfiltered, had become rare and restrained. Her new bodyguard, Agent Liam Turner, did everything by the book. A former MI5 operative, he was trained to manage risk, control situations, and maintain emotional detachment. But what he hadn't trained for was Charlotte's quiet mourning. He tried, in his own way, to bridge the gap. He asked about her day. He made dry jokes. He tried to show up with the same punctuality Thomas once had. But to Charlotte, it all felt forced. Artificial. Where Thomas had felt like a part of her world, Liam felt like a stranger trying to fit into shoes that weren't his. She responded to him with politeness, but nothing more. No shortbread biscuit halves. No secret hand signals. No glances of shared understanding during awkward public events. Instead, she retreated further inward, growing more still and quiet with each passing day. The breaking point came at a children's charity event. Charlotte was asked to give a short speech, something she had done before with ease. But when she stepped up to the podium, something inside her faltered. She looked out over the crowd, at the flashing cameras, at the sea of unfamiliar faces, and didn't see him. The space just behind the front row, where Thomas had always stood with quiet watchfulness, was now empty. And the emptiness hit her like a wave. She didn't cry. She didn't flee the stage. She smiled, composed herself, and delivered the speech with perfect poise. But her voice lacked the warmth it once had. Her words felt memorized rather than felt. When she returned to the car afterward, she sat in silence, staring out the window, her hands folded tightly in her lap. William, seated beside her, noticed the tension in her small frame. "Are you okay?" he asked gently. Charlotte didn't turn to look at him. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I miss someone." Later that night, William and Catherine sat with Margaret, the family nanny who had known Charlotte since birth. Concerned by her sudden emotional distance, they asked for her insight. Margaret listened quietly, then said something that struck them both deeply: "She still talks about Thomas. Not just in passing, sometimes she has full conversations. It's like she's keeping him close the only way she can." There was a long silence in the room. Catherine's eyes filled with quiet worry. William looked down, the weight of the revelation sinking in. They hadn't just replaced a bodyguard, they had severed a bond without explanation, without closure. And Charlotte, just 9 years old, had been left to navigate that loss alone. It became painfully clear, she wasn't just adjusting to a change in routine. She was grieving. And no one had truly seen it until now. One rainy Sunday afternoon, the palace felt unusually quiet. The usual bustle of staff and tutors had slowed, and a calm hush settled over the corridors. In her room, Princess Charlotte sat on the floor, surrounded by scattered photos, drawings, and little mementos that once meant nothing to the world but meant everything to her. A pink laptop rested in front of her, its screen glowing softly as she clicked through old pictures, some grainy, some crisp, each capturing a moment of joy, of safety, of trust. She paused at one photo, her 6th birthday, her smile wide, and just behind her, barely in frame, stood Thomas, arms folded, watching over her with that familiar, steady presence. She stared at it for a long time. Her eyes welled up, but she didn't let the tears fall. Instead, she pressed record. Her voice was shaky at first. "This is my bodyguard. His name is Tommy," she said softly, each word loaded with emotion far beyond her 9 years. "He protected me every single day for 7 years. He made me laugh. He taught me how to stay brave when I was scared." Her voice cracked slightly, and she paused, breathing in deeply, her fingers tightening around the bracelet she always kept near. And then, one day, he just disappeared. As she spoke, she layered her voice over a quiet piano melody, carefully arranging each photo and video clip into a seamless tribute, one that told their story, not as princess and protector, but as friends. She included drawings he had helped her with during long flights, short video clips of them walking through palace gardens, and even a blurry photo of them building a snowman at Balmoral, both laughing, both carefree. The final shot was a close-up of the silver bracelet she had given him, its engraving, 7 years. "Thank you, Tommy." Clearly visible. She whispered the last words, barely audible, "This is for you." But once the video was complete, she froze. Her finger hovered over the publish button, her heart pounding. She knew the palace rules. Everything she said, did, or posted was monitored. But this wasn't just a video. It was her voice. Her truth. And she wasn't sure anyone would understand. For 3 days, the video sat in draft mode. Every night, she would open the tab, rewatch it, and close it again. It wasn't fear that held her back, it was the fear of being misunderstood, of someone telling her that her feelings weren't appropriate, or worse, that her memories didn't matter. But on the 4th morning, something changed. Charlotte woke before sunrise. The sky outside her window was still dark, but her heart felt lighter, more certain. She walked quietly to her desk, opened her laptop, and without hesitation, clicked publish. In that moment, she wasn't just a princess. She was a grieving friend, a brave little girl telling the world her story, because no one else had.